Great. Okay. Thank you so much for coming to another webinar from our international exchange visitor. I just want to introduce Dr. Bacon to you. For those of you who know her, she's a professor at Marriage, Couples, and Family Therapy Program at TSSPP Anaheim campus. For more information I want to share with you is for past 6 years in a row, Dr. Bacon has to be is the faculty lead for our study abroad program to Switzerland, like 6 years in a row. So hopefully we cross all our fingers that this summer we can travel. The program is focused on spirituality and addiction. It has been one of our most popular programs in TSSPP. And the participants, like the students, have had a life-changing and impactful experience in the international context, learning the spiritual component of addiction and treatment, as well as its integration into the foundation of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12-step model. Yeah. So now I will just pass on the virtual microphone to Dr. Bacon to introduce our exchange visitor, Jasko Jervich. Now I know it's different pronunciation. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Dr. Bacon.
Part of the learning experience.
Yes,
right?
For me too. Yeah.
Yes, well, welcome everybody. I'm so glad to have you attend this important talk because I think we've all been hearing a lot about Brexit, and then the pandemic happened, and now we're kind of, still kind of aware of the term, but what exactly is going on and how does that impact us and how has it impacted Europe? So that's part of what Mr. Jerkovich is going to talk about, but I wanted to introduce him because I have had the pleasure to work with him for several years with our study abroad program, as he's our program coordinator once we're in country. And but beyond that, he's coming to visit us from Paris, France, from the Paris School of Business, where he's an instructor at the Paris School of Business, and he holds a master's degree in public law from University of Belgrade and a master's degree in European Public Comparative Law from the Sorbonne University in Paris. He worked as an associate in a law firm and was hired by the official journal to analyze the jurisprudence of the Serbian highest court and the European Court of Human Rights. He is an international educator, and he has, as I mentioned, supported our study abroad program for 3 years in a row. And so we're just thrilled to have him with us because this is one of the things I think Chicago School does very well, is bringing us into contact with individuals from other countries so that we are connected to our vast and diverse profession all over the world. So I will let Mr. Jerkovich go ahead and take the mic next.
Okay, thank you very much, Cindy. Thank you very much, Dr. Bacon, for this wonderful introduction. So today we will speak about Brexit. Today we will try to understand if Brexit is the beginning of the end for the United Kingdom and for the European Union, or it might present an impulse towards the stronger and more united Europe. Jean Monnet, one of the European founding fathers, said, quote, "Europe will be forged in crisis and will be the sum of the solutions adopted for those crises," end of quote. And Brexit represents a systemic shock that sent seismic waves on the both sides of the English Channel. It is the most important constitutional shakeup the UK has known since it joined Six-Nation European Economic Community on January the 1st, 1973. It is also the first time that European Union lost a member. So it presents a long-term challenge for both the UK and the Union. So to better understand whether the Brexit presents the beginning of the end for both the Union and the United Kingdom, or may be impulsed towards stronger and more united Europe. I will briefly speak about the history of the European integration, then we will speak about the complex relationship the UK has always had with its European partners, and then we will briefly discuss the economic effects of Brexit and the future perspectives. So we have so many things to discuss today, so let's start with a brief historical introduction to the European integration. It is important to understand that before becoming a real political objective, the idea of united Europe was just a dreams in the minds of philosophers and visionaries. Victor Hugo imagined United States of Europe inspired by humanistic ideals, but that dream was shattered by terrible wars that devastated the European continent during the first half of the 20th century. But a new kind of hope emerged after the Second World War, and the French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman, in his now famous declaration made on May the 9th, 1950, proposed to place French and German production of coal and steel under one common high authority, and within just 1 year, 6 founding members, France, West Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg, signed the Treaty of Paris establishing the European Coal and Steel Community. That treaty created the first supranational institution in Europe, and that first supranational institution will later become today's European Union. And the mobilizing force for the European integration was the vision offered, the dream dreamt, the promise of a better future. European integration process has been a leap into unknown with 2 main objectives: consolidation of the peace and the reconstruction of European economic prosperity in the aftermath of the Second World War. Creating an era of peace and economic prosperity promised by the EU founding fathers was to be realized by an economic program through and by the rule of law. However, many ambitious ventures were doomed to fail because states were not ready to surrender large parts of their sovereignty to the benefit of common institutions. The European solution for this issue was to create small areas of solidarity, small areas of cooperation among member states, and then based on the success of those small areas to extend their scope. Coal and steel were the 2 most vital materials crucial for economic development. Coal was the primary energy source in Europe. Steel was a fundamental material for industry, and to manufacture it, it required a large amount of coal. And both materials were needed to create weapons. As such, those 2 materials were unavoidable choice for the beginning of the European joint venture. And that practical, gradual, realistic approach to extending the sectors of activity and cooperation among the member states was really effective. After the creation of the European Coal and Steel Community, it gave birth to European Economic Community. And the Treaty of Rome establishing European Economic Community still forms the basis of the EU treaty law. The Treaty of Rome overwhelmingly focused on economic integration, but it also set out a wider political vision for an ever closer union among people of Europe to eliminate barriers which divide Europe. That was the proclaimed goal of the European integration process. And the complex architecture of the EU today could be seen or viewed as being halfway between an association of sovereign states like the United Nations and politically integrated federation like the United States. And the European Union is partially a victim of its own success. The enmity between France and Germany is no longer a living memory. The war between European member states, EU member states, became unthinkable. It really fuels the sentiment that the EU is nothing more than one huge, expensive, and alienated bureaucracy. But there is something more. Whenever a justification for an action derives not from process, as in classical democracy, nor from the result, but from the ideal pursuit, the destiny to be achieved, the promised land waiting at the end of the road, as is the case with the European integration process, the disappointment is almost inevitable. Why? Because we know that reality is always more challenging and less satisfying than the dream which preceded it. And independent India, Kenya, or even the United States of America were very different from the dreams which preceded it. The emblematic manifestation of this in the context of the European integration is the difference between 868 inspiring words of Schuman dream and declaration and 271 very real pages of articles and paragraphs of the Treaty of Lisbon, the latest in a series of the EU treaties. The United Kingdom, however, has never been attracted by that dream of ever closer union, which remains one of the main political objectives of the European integration process. Successive generations of the UK politicians fought almost every proposal of deeper political and institutional integration. Instead, the UK's participation in Europe has been motivated exclusively by economic consideration. And the creation of the European Coal and Steel Community and European Economic Community, those first small steps for initially only 6 involved countries, but giant leaps for the European integration process, they were made without UK's participation and involvement. And the UK has always struggled to define its relationship with the continent that surrounds it. It constantly alternated between moving closer and pulling away from the European continent. Brexit is far from the first time that the UK has really questioned whether it belongs to the European continent. The efforts that ultimately led to the creation of the European Union were paralleled by another attempt to foster trade in Europe at the same time when European Coal and Steel Community and European Economic Community were being organized. The UK sought to establish common market while avoiding the necessity to give up the part of its sovereignty. Under the impulse of the United Kingdom, the European Free Trade Association was created in 1960. European Free Trade Association meant to liberalize trade in Europe without subscribing to the commitments of political character embodied in the Treaty of Rome, establishing European Economic Community, without that goal of ever closer union. And the European Free Trade Association and the European Economic Community were two dominant Western European trade blocs and historical competitors. The European Free Trade Association passed through 2 important crises in the 1960s. The first one occurred in 1961 when the UK made formal application to join the European Economic Community without informing its European Free Trade Association partners of its intention to join the competitors. But that UK's attempt to join European Economic Community was vetoed by France in 1963 and 1967. French President Charles de Gaulle, he deeply distrusted the British, and he thought that in dispute, they would always take American side. He thought that UK's membership in the European Economic Community would be a trial horse for the US influence. And the second crisis in the European Free Trade Association occurred in 1964 when to support pound sterling, British pound, UK suddenly introduced 15% custom duties on all industrial imports, which was clearly the violation of the European Free Trade Association Convention. So the UK was founding member of the European Free Trade Association and provoked two major crises in this organization before it left it in 1973 to join European Economic Community. And despite the fact that the UK provoked two major crises in the European Free Trade Association, that association, they found it before it left it to join the European Economic Community, it didn't help European Free Trade Association to prosper. The fact that the UK left didn't help them at all. European Free Trade Association now has only 4 member states and it is closely associated to the EU. And Mark Twain said that history never repeats itself, but it rhymes. And the UK immediately started to debate the pros and cons of the membership in the European Economic Community, this new club they joined. The first Brexit referendum was held on June the 7th, 1975, less than 3 years after they joined this new club. Harold Wilson, the UK Prime Minister at the time, was accused that he used 1975 referendum as a means to overcome divisions in his own Labour Party. The UK Prime Minister, David Cameron, who called 2016 Brexit referendum, also faced criticism that he called it just to heal divisions in his own Conservative Party. So both Labour and Conservative parties, main political parties in the UK, were deeply divided over the question of Europe, and both Harold Wilson in 1975 and David Cameron in 2016 strongly supported the Remain side. But there is one huge difference between Harold Wilson in 1975 and David Cameron in 2016. What is the difference? Harold Wilson won 1975 the referendum. At that moment, 67% of British voters voted to remain in European Economic Community, but that was hardly the end of the debate. Neither the sharp divisions in the UK society over Europe were healed, nor the British struggle with its European partners were over. Then, the question of the UK's budgetary imbalances or those excessive contributions to the EU budget were the main topics under the spotlight both during 1975 and 2016 referendum campaigns. The first temporary correction mechanism to lower down the UK's contribution to the EU budget was agreed in 1975, the second one in 1979 during the summit in Dublin. This summit in Dublin will be remembered by newly appointed UK Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher asking for her money back. Quote, "We are not asking for a penny piece of a community money for Britain. What we are asking is for a very large amount of our own money back." End of quote. Demanding her money back infuriated its European partners, and German Chancellor and Helmut Schmidt, French President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, they were particularly infuriated. Quote, "She was asking for her pennies back when she hadn't yet spent one," French President Giscard said to Schmidt. And the UK's demand for lower contributions provoked one of the first major crises in the European Economic Community. To address this question once and for all, a meeting of 10 member states at that moment was convened. It took place in a magnificent Fontainebleau Royal Palace near Paris in June 1984. The negotiations in 1984 were very difficult, And when it seemed that they would collapse, Greek Prime Minister Andreas Papandreou said that it would be a great relief if the UK left the Union. They didn't leave. Margaret Thatcher successfully negotiated the UK rebate. And the rule of law is one of the fundamental values of the EU. The entire European integration project is based on the rule of law, but that UK rebate has never been set in the EU treaties, but it has been in force since Fontainebleau Summit in 1984. After the creation of the UK rebate, other member states argued that their budgetary burden was too excessive. They asked for their own rebates or discounts. They asked for another correction mechanism to lower their contributions to the EU budget. And following the creation of the rebate, different UK rebate, different ad hoc, permanent and temporary correction mechanisms were introduced to lower contribution to the EU budget of other member states, and it really created a complex system of temporary and permanent correction mechanism, and those correction mechanisms, they attracted a lot of criticism. Why? Because they make the EU finances less transparent, less fair, harder to reform. There was almost unanimous criticism of those correction mechanisms. All EU member states, except the UK, called for their suppression, and Brexit provided a unique opportunity to get rid of those correction mechanisms, and they were all eliminated in the European Commission's proposal of the EU's long-term budgetary plan for 2021 to 2027. But finally, when that long-term budgetary plan for 2021 to 2027 was adopted, the UK rebate has not been renewed because the UK left the Union. However, different correction mechanisms are maintained for Germany, Austria, Netherlands, Denmark, and Sweden. And Jean-Claude Juncker, president of the European Commission from 2014 to 2019, claimed after Brexit referendum that the wind was back in Europe's sails and that the UK's withdrawal from the Union would provide a new impetus for more united Union. However, the truth is that for almost 5 decades, hiding behind the UK has been one of the oldest tricks in Brussels. The UK was rejecting an endless number of EU proposals, which allowed other governments to avoid negotiating clashes and confrontations. Member states knew that the UK and its Eurosceptic media would do the blocking of unpopular measures for them. With Brexit, this is no longer possible. And the example of the correction mechanism is important for me, and it's striking. Those correction mechanisms, they attracted quasi-unanimous criticism. All member states were against them, save in knowledge that the UK would oppose their removal. The UK left the EU, its rebate has not been renewed. However, different correction mechanisms are not maintained for 1 or 2, but 5 EU member states vigorously and successfully fought for their own correction mechanism. Therefore, Brexit will not necessarily clear the way for more united Europe. Member states that were hiding behind the UK now must step forward. Perhaps only when the biggest troublemaker is out, the teacher will see and discover how unruly are the rest of the class. And the United Kingdom has been always an ambivalent partner in Europe for multiple institutional, constitutional, historical, cultural, ideological reasons, including its profound attachment to liberalism and free trade. It has constantly favored closer economic ties with Europe while rejecting deeper political and institutional integration. That is why it is not surprising that the UK took a leading role in the development of the EU single markets. I'm sorry. Because the EU single market is the high point of market liberalism. Companies operating in the EU single market can sell their products and services freely anywhere in the EU. The EU single market is designed both to reduce trade costs, open up national markets, it stimulates competition and trade, and as one bloc without borders where goods, people, services, and capital can move around freely, the EU single market fueled economic growth and made the everyday life of European citizens and businesses easier. And despite the constant fear that more and more decisions taken at EU level would weaken its own power, the UK was the driving force behind the creation of the EU single market. And the EU single market is now praised as one of the greatest EU achievements. Margaret Thatcher, despite her growing antipathy towards the EU in her later years of premiership, praised the remarkable progress achieved in the development of the EU single market. Quote, by getting rid of barriers, by making it possible for companies to operate on a European scale, we can best compete with the United States, Japan, and other new economic powers emerging in Asia and elsewhere. End of quote. That is what she said in very famous 1988 Bruges speech, which became founding text of Euroscepticism. However, Thatcher's critics, they say that she saw the benefits of an open market, but she failed to acknowledge that markets need laws and government to function. The creation of the EU single market has necessarily led to deepening of the European law. It necessarily consolidated the supremacy of EU law over the national law. Common market simply requires common rules and regulations, and the UK was the driving force behind the creation of the single market, while always rejecting more and more common rules adopted in Brussels. The UK was also pushing for more majority voting in EU institutions instead of unanimous vote. This was an easy solution to overcome pressures on national governments to protect particular national industries, and it helped the development of the EU single market. It also facilitated the enlargement, another key instance of British influence. When the Berlin Wall came down in 1989, Margaret Thatcher opposed to German reunification. Helmut Kohl, the German chancellor at that time, recalls her saying, "We bet the Germans twice and now they are back." However, as pragmatic leader, Margaret Thatcher understood that Germany cannot remain divided forever, and she supported the need to deeply integrate the new reunified Germany in the European Union. The United Kingdom also became a strong supporter of Central and Eastern European countries joining the EU. And the accession of 10 countries on May the 1st, 2004 has been the largest single expansion in the history of the EU. The EU went from 15 to 25 member states, and most of older member states, most of the EU 15 member states maintained restrictions on the free movement of people over a long transition period, but not the UK. the UK, Ireland, and Sweden, they immediately opened up their labor markets for the people from countries that joined the EU in 2004. And the European Union has enlarged 7 times to include 22 states beyond the original 6 that established the European Coal and Steel Community and the European Economic Community, and it has lost only 1 member state, but one that has been the greatest advocate of the enlargement. The European Free Trade Association, by contrast, has lost 5 of its 7 original members, and 1 subsequent member gained only 3, and now has only 4 member states. Therefore, the EU enlargement is another instance of the UK influence and the great EU success, because even in those times of major crisis, the EU still weights more than 16% of the world's GDP and accounts for around 1/6 of the global economy. With almost 450 million inhabitants, it is a larger market than Japan or even the United States of America. So the enlargement is without any doubt another extraordinary EU success for which the UK should take credit. And although the UK has never been fully committed to the idea of United Europe, EU officials recognize that Margaret Thatcher shaped many of the UK's instincts toward Europe. She welcomed the market liberalization and the creation of the EU single market while being very hostile towards any form of deeper political and institutional integration. However, it is important to emphasize that her successors, they didn't do anything to bridge the widening gap between the European Union and the UK. For example, the Treaty on European Union signed in Maastricht in 1992 had a profound impact on EU's institutional structure and the decision-making processes. The EU, as we know it today, owns its name and nature to this treaty. This Treaty of Maastricht expanded the areas of cooperation among member states. It gave the European Parliament more say in decision-making processes, and it led to the creation of the single European currency of the euro. John Major, who replaced Margaret Thatcher as the UK Prime Minister, successfully negotiated major legal opt-outs from the Maastricht Treaty. The UK has never introduced euro, and the UK maintained more deregulated labor market. And there is another story that I would like to tell you that is related to the negotiations prior to the Maastricht Treaty. During those negotiations, the UK opposed the 48-hour limit on the working week. The UK opposed the coordinated EU minimum wage policy. When the UK opposed the 48-hour week on the 48-hour limit on the working week and the EU minimum wage, it faced hostility from all over the Union. The UK was accused of undermining the EU core values and promoting horrifying working conditions. But that legal opt-out over 48-hour working week, for which the UK fought a lonely battle in Maastricht, is now quietly used by 15 out of 27 member states. Therefore, the EU without UK will not necessarily be a more harmonious club. Other member states, that were hiding behind the UK now have to show their face, their true face. And John Major, the UK Prime Minister, further poisoned the UK-EU relationship. In 1996, following the outbreak of so-called mad cow disease, the EU prohibited the export of British beef. In a matter of fact, the whole world did it. And in a desperate attempt to remove this ban, John Major had declared that his government would block any EU measure that required unanimity. And by figuratively sitting at the table with its arms folded and refusing to say yes or no, UK ministers blocked more than 100 EU measures, and they blocked some measures for which they themselves campaigned. And the UK's policy of non-cooperation was the serious breakdown in the EU functioning. This UK's policy of non-cooperation ignited the worst institutional crisis after the budgetary crisis in late 1970s and 1980s. And just to remind you, the UK was the source of dispute at that time too. And it is important to understand that this UK's policy of non-cooperation, it really infuriated Brussels, but it also enraged the UK's European partners, who already regarded the UK as the odd man out, always and almost a priori saying no. And in 1997, John Major was succeeded by Tony Blair, who was seen as the most dynamic modern leader in Europe. The UK pushed for simplifying the EU's voting rules to smooth the expansion, which was the long-term UK's goal. It also played a certain role in the strengthening of the EU's foreign and security policy. And the new Treaty of Amsterdam, signed in 1997, that entered into force in 1999, incorporated the Schengen agreements, which abolished border controls in Europe into the EU legal system. But this was a step too far, even for young, modern, liberal Blair. The UK remained outside the Schengen area. And there is an almost endless list of UK's legal opt-outs from the EU treaties. The UK refused to introduce euro. The UK refused to abolish border checks that would facilitate free movement of people in Europe. But at the same time, the UK drew some of the EU's greatest achievements, such as the development of the EU single market and the development and the EU's enlargement. And the big strategic question for the EU27 is what Brexit really means for the future of Europe. The EU must now find a way to cooperate constructively with a neighbor that is both an important partner and prospective competitor. And in his shocking announcement that he would be campaigning for Brexit made on 21st of February 2016, Boris Johnson rightly said that Brexit would pose a risk to the general morale of Europe and to the prestige of European project. He also expressed his hopes that Europe, quote, would see a vote to leave as a challenge, not just to strike a new and harmonious relationship with Britain, but to recover some of competitiveness that the continent has lost in the last decades, end of quote. And Since the referendum vote on 23rd of June 2016, the exchange rate of British pound against other leading currency has fallen. However, the fact that European stock markets were down in the days after the Brexit vote and that European banks were particularly hard hit suggested that Brexit would not be beneficial for the EU. One response to the Brexit vote from the rest of Europe was that a tough line should be taken with the UK to show other countries that dissent has important consequences. But this would only make matters worse. Voters, they have legitimate concerns about the direction in which European leaders are taking the Union. Punishing the UK would not safeguard the EU, it would only accelerate its dissolution. European Union should not be held together by fear and threats of what would happen if a country leaves. The European Union should be held because of the benefits that offers, benefits that far exceeded the costs, the economic prosperity, the sense of solidarity, the pride in being European. And it is interesting that it later emerged that Boris Johnson had written alternative text in which he reluctantly backed remain instead of leave. Quote, "Shut your eyes, hold your breath, think of Britain, think of the rest of EU, think of the future, think of the desire of your children and your grandchildren to live and work in other European countries, to sell things there, to make friends, and perhaps to find partners there. Britain is a great nation, a global force for good. It is surely a boon for the world and for Europe that we should be intimately engaged in the EU." End of quote. That is what he said in his unpublished column for Daily Telegraph, written 2 days before he supported the Leave side. And when a couple goes to marriage counseling, it is said that old-style counselors would try to figure out how to save that marriage, how to make it work. But modern one begins by asking, should this marriage be saved? And the cost of dissolution, both financial and emotional, is very high. The UK, being intimately engaged in the EU, as Boris Johnson suggested in his Pro-Remain article, and building a new harmonious relationship with the Union, as he hoped for in his pro-Brexit statement, would be indeed mutually beneficial. It has been in the interests of everyone to work out the best possible economic relationship consistent with the democratic wishes and concerns of those on both sides of the English Channel. The benefits of trade and economic integration are mutual. Anything the EU does to try to punish the UK would have an equal and opposite effect, hurting itself at least as much as the UK. And it is important to understand that both the United States of America and the EU, they're competing to define the rules of trade that other countries would follow. And it is in the EU's best interest to keep the UK as close as possible in its orbit. And in 1959, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, then still a senator, famously said that when written in Chinese, the word crisis is composed of two characters. One represents danger and one represents opportunity. Crises have driven progress through the history of the European construction. Many of them appear to pose existential dangers, so there was no shortage of extraordinary opportunities. But more than giant leaps, the European Union has always made only small steps forward and survived by muddling through the crisis. And this is completely consistent with that practical, gradual, realistic approach to extending the sectors of activity and cooperation on which the EU's creation, development, and success are based. And when we look back, the times of crisis, they always show the similar pattern of action, growing expectations regarding the EU's role, resulting in gradual but very limited internal reforms. And when the UK left the EU, predicted domino effect didn't happen. There is no sign that Brexit would lead to substantial institutional reform in the EU, but at the same time, there is no candidates for leaving the Union at this moment. And on 24th of December 2020, just a week prior to the end of Brexit transition period, the UK-EU reached the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. That is the largest or the biggest bilateral trade deal in the history of humankind, and it comprises the basis of for the future economic and security cooperation between the UK and the EU. It has been negotiated in just 11 months, much faster than typical trade deal, and the EU preserves the integrity of the single market, and the UK achieves zero tariffs, zero quota trade in goods with its main trading partner. And it is important to emphasize that the EU doesn't have zero tariff, zero quota trade in goods deal with any other country in the world. The UK got much more than what would be granted under standard global trade arrangements. And major exporters in the UK, they're relieved because they don't face tariffs or quotas, but they incur increased costs for border formalities, the need of duplication of certification procedures, and increased obstacles for recruitment of talent from EU countries. For the first time since 1993, when customs controls at internal EU borders were abolished, goods traveling between the Great Britain and the EU no longer move freely. Customs checks are enforced. Each load of seafood from the UK now needs to be accompanied by more than 70 pages of customs documents, and extensive sanitary checks are conducted at the border. Before the end of the transition period, the process was simple. Each shipment needed a delivery note made of 2 forms and invoices, and there were no checks. So prior to the end of the transition period, delivery note and invoices, no checks at the borders. Now more than 70 pages of different customs forms and extensive checks at the border. But that is the price of reclaiming sovereignty. While the UK has taken back the control of domestic fishing water, ended the free movement of persons, and escaped from the direct jurisdiction of the Court of Justice of the European Union, businesses and consumers, they face new barriers to trade. And in winter 2021 economic forecast, the European Commission said that UK's exit from the single market on the terms agreed by Boris Johnson's government would generate a loss of GDP of about 2.25% in the UK compared with the continued membership. In the meanwhile, the hit for the EU by the end of 2022 is estimated to be about 0.5%. And when it rains, it pours. Brexit came together with the COVID-19 pandemic, that caused the steepest decline in GDP both in the EU and the UK since the Second World War. But the estimates, the UK's estimates show that the UK's GDP could be between 4 and 6% lower cumulatively over the next 15 years than would have been in the EU, while the impact of COVID is just 2% of the GDP. So once again, the biggest pandemic since the Spanish flu will lower the UK's GDP by 2%, while the long-term effect of Brexit will be 4 to 6% of the UK's GDP. And to finish, I know that we're running out of the time. I would just like to emphasize that when the Trade and Cooperation Agreement was announced, Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, said, quote, "We will be your friend, your ally, your supporter, and indeed, never let it be forgotten, your number one market." And if both sides indeed maximize their efforts to minimize the newly established barriers to trade, Brexit will not be the beginning of the end, neither for the Union nor for the United Kingdom. And the way forward, although with a broken heart, is clear. If by contrast, commitment of the closest possible economic integration is not lived up, the EU will show nothing but contempt for democracy, and the idea of united Europe will continue to decline, while the disintegration could be expected on the other side of the English Channel. I think that we have some time for questions if there are any questions.
Thank you, Drasko. Any questions from the audience? Any comments? I have learned a lot. I haven't about, I have learned a lot. It's pretty shocking, some comments. Any comments and any questions?
Well, I have some in that I was looking at most recent journal articles about Brexit, and I'll tell you, there doesn't seem to be a lot of consensus about really why people voted for it, who voted for it. There's all kinds of rationale from immigration and all kinds of things. Trump, I don't know how he got involved in Brexit. But and then trying to figure out if people are being affected with mental health issues. I mean, it's just really all over the map. And I don't know if you would agree, Drasko, but it seems like there really isn't a cohesive view of how this really is affecting either Europe or specifically Great Britain at this point in time, sociologically as well as politically. And I don't know what your take is.
Okay, sociologically, it is way more harder to say. It is way more harder to predict sociological effects of Brexit, but economic effects are pretty clear. Loss in GDP of 2.25% in the UK and 0.5% in the EU by the end of this year, and the UK's GDP will be 4 to 6% lower over the next 15 years than would have been in the Union. And you mentioned immigration. Immigration is quoted as one of the main reasons to vote leave. Vote leave campaign played on two cards, played on a card of British sovereignty being under threat by foreign forces, the EU and immigrants, and it played on the card of EU free movement of people leading to uncontrolled immigration, and Leave campaign was able to connect with people emotionally, and it convinced many people to vote Leave.
Okay. So because we did have the COVID experience the last 2 years, so now it's hard to know if the GDP, you know, the loss is that just from Brexit? I mean, how do we know? Did the numbers come out extrapolating?
We know because this is pretty simple to understand, because when the EU single market basically removed many barriers to trade between the UK and the EU. The EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement is the biggest bilateral trade deal in the history of humankind, but it is also the first trade deal that established new barriers to trade. And when you establish new barriers to trade between two large trading partners, it will lead to the decrease in trade between them. It will lead to loss in GDP for both parties, but the loss will be greater for smaller trading partners.
Right. So because the EU is so large.
Exactly. That is why the EU will handle it better. If there is another moment, I know that we're running out of the time, but I just want to emphasize that the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement provides for zero tariff, zero quota for trade in goods. And the EU runs surplus in trade in goods with the UK and deficit in trade in services.
Wow.
And this trade and cooperation agreement doesn't guarantee free trade of services between the UK and the EU. There are a lot more new barriers to the trade in services.
Wow.
That is why this deal is way more beneficial to the EU, and that is why the loss of EU's GDP is lower than the UK's.
Got it. That makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, thank you. There's some comments here. Marsha, do you want to unmute yourself? You want me to read from the chat box? Okay, Jessica, can you see it? Like a very interesting, informative presentation. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's how we feel as well.
Yeah,
thank you so much,
don't
Marsha.
get the details over here,
Correct.
you know?
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Very insightful as well.
Yeah, we'll see you on
Sarah.
Saturday, Sarah.
Yeah, Sarah, we see you on Saturday in San Diego. So I think we almost like 1 minute, and if you don't
Thanks
have
for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for joining, and I'm going to share the recording with you and everyone else who registered for the session. Thank you so much. I know some of you might be in the place that very late already, 8:30 probably. Thank you so much for joining us, and enjoy your evening. And Jessica, we will see you for the rest of the week.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Yeah,
Have a good evening. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.